Hello everyone, welcome to Nourish Podcast. Today we're diving into a book named How to Kill a White Man. And no, it is not a manual on how to do it, but more of a spiritual and emotional story or stories. Today, welcome Augustus Britton. Hello.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm great. I also wanted to mention that this is the last previous book that Augustus wrote, but I know you're working on a debut novel right now.
Yeah, I have a few things that I'm working on. Yeah, one of them in particular is will be my debut novel that I'm excited about. Yeah.
I'm so excited for you.
Thank you. Thank you. We shall see.
When is it coming out?
That is to be determined. I do a lot of self-publishing, but this novel I don't really want to self-publish. But the publishing world is very, I would say, kind of unusual these days.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you have self-publishing, and then you have traditional publishing, and now we have, I'm forgetting what it's called, but there's one that's sort of in the middle. And there's pros and cons to all of them. I think the cons of self-publishing is you have to do all of the publicity work in a way,
right,
and your distribution channels, and if you want to be in bookstores as opposed to just on Amazon particularly, that's the place that most people self-publish. And it's super easy and it's great, and it's a great way to get your work out there. However, with more traditional publishing, with a publishing house, they help you with your distribution in a different way, your publicity in a different way. So I'm interested in doing a more traditional book deal style publishing route for this novel, which is about, I lived in a place called Marfa, Texas. It's a kind of artsy cowboy town in the middle of nowhere in Texas, in the Big Bend in far west Texas. It's kind of a comedy, coming of age, on the road type story. So, we'll see what happens. But I have other things too: screenplays, plays for the stage.
That's super exciting. I know you also do
journalism. I interview people pretty often. I work for a magazine called Flaunt Magazine. It's a Los Angeles-based magazine. So it's just staying in the. Some writers will just do one medium, I only write novels or I only write screenplays. I like to mix it up, and I'm curious about all the different, avenues. So I'm also from New York. That's where the playwriting comes in for me. That's why I'm really, why would a playwright ever live in Los Angeles? But I do write screenplays because it's less theater here than in New York. But I kind of grew up around the theater in New York City. I grew up in Brooklyn. I got actors up and down my family. So writing for the stage has always been really interesting. I think that's actually my favorite kind of writing plays. There's something about it that I love, with the dialogue and the space, and I like to mix it up.
creating the characters.
Yeah.
I mean, we're going to dive a little bit more into depth about this specific book.
Right.
But I wanted to know, before we dive into How to Kill a White Man, I wanted to know about more yourself. I know you come from a line of actors, writers, and you did find your purpose in writing, and you do it in such different categories. And I wanted to know if you have one main goal that we put all these categories into one and describe it as your message or your purpose?
You know what? I just leave that up to God. I have a certain belief in, my own concept of God, what that represents to me. And with my work now, it's a lot less about, of course, like having financial success and winning awards. I mean, you'd be lying if you said that wasn't appealing, or would be a goal when you're creating something. But honestly, if I can continue to be self-sufficient off of my work, it's just kind of like, what more could I ask for? And then whatever the limit is, or however far out into the world it may get, that's up to God, so to speak. I know a lot of people are freaked out by the word God. I'm not, thank God. That's been a process for me, but I just have faith that it's all gonna go where it's supposed to go,
And I know you do a lot of writing about mindfulness, spirituality, and daily life stories and patterns, and what we as this generation are going through and experiencing. So when you say God, being a spiritual person yourself, but also a spiritual writer, what is the meaning of God?
I think God, to me right now, that definition for me is kind of constantly evolving over time alongside me. But to me, God is positivity. It's like the natural order of things, which lines up with love and positivity. Whatever that is supposed to look like, that's like the true north for me. That's what my concept of God represents, that everything is exactly the way it's supposed to be. Whatever is supposed to happen, good, bad, ugly, whatever that even means, I have faith that it's exactly where it's supposed to be.
Not worrying about the future or what the next step is, or basically aligning with what's already available and is positive.
Right.
Is that right?
I think I'm not like enlightened by any means, of course, but so I'm curious about the future, I think, it's a practice to not worry about things. But I think faith is part of that balancer. Faith balances things. Faith provides balance for me. Particularly as an artist, that is such a unpredictable occupation, I don't know if something is going to be successful or make money, you know what I mean? So having faith and just continuing to show up and just put it out into the world, that's successful to begin with. It's funny, my brother and I talk about this. We've talked about this a lot. My brother has a podcast as well, and he's done quite well with his podcast, and I co-host it with him from time to time. And he writes, he's published books, I publish books, and we've talked about how many people do you really need to affect? It's like, does it need to be 1,000 people? Does it need to be 1 million? Or is one person enough? I don't know if it was Tupac. It might have been Tupac that said this. He said, I may not be the person that changes. I'm totally just, this is not the exact quote, but yeah, I may not be the person that changes the world, but I very well may inspire the person that does. So, I don't know. Did I write this
That's
book?
a very good point.
Right. Did I write this book for that one person to read that goes, oh my God, this has inspired me to now write my own book. And they're the one that writes the next great American novel, not me.
That's so true.
Yeah. Or somebody sees this podcast and goes, oh, she can do a podcast. I can do a podcast. And they end up like, I don't know.
So I really like what you just said. I think that I can relate to a lot of it. And this is a very inspiring thing to me because I've always put things to rest just because I thought that, maybe it's not the right time. But then when you try to go back to that specific project, you don't have the same drive because, as you said about the definition of a God, to use that, you're driven to do certain things, but you don't know why you're driven to do those things at that specific moment. And I feel that there is dots that connect at certain points for a specific reason that sometimes we don't know what that reason is at that specific point.
Right.
And I know you said that God is a growing definition to you. So to go back to this book, because this is what we're going to talk about, and before diving into the title, I wanted to know, because you wrote this quite a while ago, what was the definition of God then when you wrote this?
I don't think I really knew what that would be. I don't know. I might have had the same answer as I have now. I've been in dark places where God was not exactly something I was super excited about, hearing in a way. But it could have been a drug, a drink, or a person. My gods were the more material things. And then you strip that away. And I think all those things, you're trying to have a spiritual experience. You're trying to fill a God-sized hole when you're doing those things. So this whole book, in a way, also is my journey trying to find God. I know that sounds super big, and I don't know, I'm very aware of people's, and I've talked about this and written about this, I'm very aware of people, and I think it's sad. I think it's changing, but I think it's sad that people have such a, and it's reasonable considering what some people grow up with. Okay. They have such a sort of intense reaction to the word God.
I see what you mean.
I think I was blessed. I was talking about this the other day. I was a little blessed because I didn't grow up religious. I grew up more spiritual. So I didn't have any prejudice like built in over time around God and a punishing God and all that stuff. I was able to, define that for myself. I think I got, either way, you're probably going to want to define it for yourself. But, so what was the question?
I was asking you, what was the definition of God then?
Then
you were like, probably it's the same or probably not, because I didn't grow up religious. And that's actually a great point. I believe that in order to achieve self-actualization, we need to strip those layers of anxiety, of depression, of discomfort. And I feel that in our 20s, we all go through that, trying to discover who we truly are, despite the family background, the last name, despite the environment we grew up in. And I feel that life is about self-discovery, and that is the only way to reach self-actualization. And this is actually called the hierarchy of needs. It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and basically explains that every person gets to have, of course, certain needs met, whether financial, emotional, safety, and then there's the part where the drugs, as you mentioned, the materialistic things also need to be stripped down in order to discover who we truly are. Now that we talked about your journey into discovering God, would you say that by writing this book, where you were at, would you say that it's the writing itself that helps you, or just what you were going through and the normal way of basically growing?
Yeah, I think it's all part of it. I think I see now everything is information. You know, you talk about self-actualization. I would call it self-realization. It's the same thing. Or you could call it enlightenment, which is, again, is like a really lofty, really intense word that I think, you know, gets used casually. But I think everything in life, this could change, but this is kind of where I'm at now. I think everything in life is more information to get you toward eventual enlightenment. Whatever enlightenment is, I don't know what it is. I'm not enlightened. But I think everything is about that. Whatever's happening in life is moving you toward that, which you said,
You mean
called
like
it.
the work you're doing is moving you towards
Even if
that?
you don't know you're doing the work, it's happening.
I'm talking the work as for the work that you're currently, like, what you're writing about, all the screenplays.
Right. I mean, I think some of it is more in the vein, or all of it though. I mean, it's just because I don't know what the rollout is going to be. I don't know what's going to happen if I publish this or that project, or this or that thing gets made. So
Yeah, it's like you don't know what's going to happen to you in your personal journey, and also to the project and how it's perceived by others. It's like really out of control.
yeah.
So I wanted to know, the first thing I really wanted to ask you and start with, you were going to name it Anxiety, but you chose to name the book How to Kill a White Man.
Right.
What made you choose this title, and what made you change your mind about naming it Anxiety?
Well, I think there were multiple titles there, and I say in the preface I talk about the different titles. I think one of the titles, like you said, I thought Anxiety would be an interesting title, but that's kind of limiting, you know, because it's not really only that. It's also about liberation and, like, you know, journeys, like being set free from anxiety as well. So that was a little limiting. There was another title, Money, Drugs, Palo Santo, which I kind of thought encapsulated this kind of the essence of materialism with money. There's clearly a drug aspect. There's a journey like through drugs in the book. And then Palo Santo, which I love, which is I think it's like sacred wood. It's like an incense, and that represented like the spiritual aspect to me. But then this title, How to Kill a White Man, that just felt like it was true. It just felt like it was the one, you know? And I had some conversations with people about that. Like, is this too heavy? Is this going to scare people off? And I had some like mixed feelings, you know? Some people were clearly like, whoa, that's like a pretty intense title. And some people were like, it sounds like great and provocative. And honestly, if I came to the point where I was like, if I don't do this title, I'm kind of copping out. Like, it felt like the most honest title. And I, as a writer, and I've written a lot of different things and had to title a lot of different things, I think titles are really important. And they're also really, I think, instinctual and intuitive. Like, whenever I start like thinking about like, what's the title going to be? That's never it. Like, it's always there, kind of automatically, you know, like of its own accord. So, and then you just run with that. Like, you can't overthink a title, I think. So.
Did you decide of the title after you asked a few people and you got a little bit of feedback about the title? Did you decide of it at the end of the book after writing it?
a lot of times for me, the title is like the first thing that appears. I don't know why that is, but I think it also can like set the stage in a way. I think this was like closer to the end this title came up, because I do readings in theaters and I do one-man shows on, you know, and these stories, and I still do them, they came from a theater group I'm in where I read the stories, and it was just over time I was collecting these stories from the theater group, and eventually I was like, okay, there's some sort of thread here that, and I wanted to publish a book at a certain time, so I was like, okay, I think there's something here that creates some sort of you know, collection. So yeah, it was kind of simultaneous with the title. Yeah.
But if you usually would want to pick the title from the beginning, and as you said, kind of like set the tone of what the message would be, did you know what the message?
With this, the message appeared over time, because I wasn't planning on turning this into a book.
Right.
So I kept doing these one-off stories with my theater group, and I kept noticing I noticed after a while, I had like 10 of them. I noticed a kind of pattern. I was like, okay, there's these stories about self-discovery, there's dating involved, there's like drugs or alcohol involved, like trying to like transcend that. There's something going on with dating apps. There's something going on with, you know, the state of the world politically, climate. So it all kind of rolled out into its own sort of thread. And then because it was personal, I'm white, and I'm a male, and it's like this death of an old self for me, which I talk about. So that's kind of where it came, How to Kill a White Man. You know, of course I get the jokes when people, you know, say, what's your book called? I say, How to Kill a White Man. And they say, oh, is there like a manual in there? And I'm like, no, it's like a spiritual death, you know? So, which usually the smarter people know, which you knew, obviously. You're like, oh, okay, it's like a spiritual death or whatever, you know?
Absolutely. Since I started reading it, I started reading the preface, and I knew exactly where it was going, even though I read your biography and I know that you focus on spirituality and those daily stories and the patterns that are actually happening on our daily lives. I also know that you were around 25, 26 when you wrote this book, and that is where people usually in developmental psychology go through what we call quarter life crisis, as you mentioned, the self-discovery, the death, the transformation. I want to know, would you consider that specific phase a quarter life crisis when you were writing the book?
I don't. Crisis is kind of a big word.
You don't like crisis as what, man?
No, I mean, maybe it was a crisis. I mean, that's one way to describe it. Is it a crisis? Is it a revelation, a discovery, expansion? You know, I mean, it's funny, like calling things crisis, you know, like midlife crisis, quarter life crisis. Like, where did that, I don't know where that came from.
I don't know
that
either.
Sort of tag of like crisis. Like, why didn't we call it a
transformation?
Why didn't we call it a quarter life transformation? Exactly.
Yeah.
I think these stories were all through the 20s. I think it was through the 20s. And, you know, you were asking me, was this born out of a quarter life crisis?
Right.
You know, it's just, call it a crisis, whatever. It was just where I was at. And, you know, clearly when you're in your 20s in particular, you're in a place where you're less conscious and you're falling on your face constantly until hopefully you get to a certain age and go, wow, this thing isn't working for me anymore. And, you know, I mean, that's what's like funny about, like I was saying about this in particular, it's like, it's not what I would write about today. There's something beautiful though about, and I've thought about this when you're creating when you're young, particularly in your 20s, I think, and how I would say you're less conscious and you're less like aware of yourself and what you're doing. There's a kind of like freedom in a way. There's kind of a careless, like, this is like really, I've had to kind of reel it in a little bit. Like, I don't really get because I have this newsletter and a lot of the stories on my newsletter are from life. But as I've gotten older, I've really started to ask myself, do I really want to say all that? Do I really want to divulge, a romantic encounter like this? Or, so, which I think is double-edged a little bit, because it's like, am I showing enough of myself? Am I being personal enough? But also, I'm much more focused now. I'm much more clear about what I want to say. Like, this came from a place of this freedom, but also not really aware of what I was even putting out into the world for people to read, in that. Because it is quite, I mean, if you're looking at this as like a memoir, which you could totally read this and go, oh, these are all true. This is all who he is. Yeah. And it kind of is, more or less. But would I want to reveal that much now? Yeah. I think I just reveal in a different way. I'm also a different person, so.
Yeah. I mean, why wouldn't you want to reveal? What would be the reasons?
In that same way. I mean, I think it would just, well, also, I'm less like debauched, debauchery. I like that. I mean, that's kind of what this is. The book is a lot of debauchery, which is like sort of, it's kind of messy and lustful, etc. And not that those things don't live in me now. I just don't really like, I guess I'm more mature in a way. So I don't have the same stories now.
Absolutely.
Like, my stories are different now.
I thought that reading the title of the first chapter, I already started laughing.
Yeah.
Can you say what the first chapter
is? It Getting Dressed on Drugs? Getting Dressed on Drugs.
Because this is why I found it interesting. Even though I do understand why you matured, of course, after 5 or 6 years, and especially in the 20s, but I felt it was inspiring because of that specific reason. Right. First of all, I do not see people in their 20s writing. I don't see enough young writers. This is the first thing that I loved about it. It's like, why can't we write about how careless and actually free and lost a little bit in that age? Because we all are trying to find our path, our purpose, trying to find where we want to be, who we are, also based on who we come from.
Right.
Our parents, our grandparents, basically the environment. Do I really want to keep those same values that I've been taught? And it feels that in that specific age, we're unlearning so much because we're actually debating some of the stuff that we've been taught. And I felt that as soon as I read the first chapter, I was like, oh my God, okay, what am I going to read right now? Getting Dressed on Drugs. It sounded to me like, going to work, but we don't want to work, or you don't like the job, because that's what's usually about around 25 or 26. You don't like your job, and now you're high, but you still have to get dressed to go to work. And that I like to imagine what to expect in the chapter. But I also loved how vulnerable that chapter was to basically say a part of your day and how it went, but also include, which I thought was a pretty aware state, that it was a coping mechanism to anxiety, which you actually were going to pick as a title. So I really wanted to know if you still think that you coped that way, or is it just me being a reader and that's what I believed?
Coped what way?
With, being high and having the anxiety as an underlying feeling.
Yeah, well, first I want to say something that somebody said to me a while ago when I was much younger, and it's a saying, youth is wasted on the young, which when I was young and I heard, when I was younger, I'm not like, when I was younger and I heard that, I didn't like that saying. Of course, because I was younger and I didn't get it.
Yeah.
Youth is wasted on the young. But now the older I get, I really start to go, oh yeah, youth is kind of wasted on the young in a way, because unfortunately you're not conscious enough to, really be present to your life. That's kind of fascinating to me. It's just kind of a tangent. But yeah, a coping mechanism. I mean, all drugs and alcohol and desires, sexuality, those things. I mean, those can all be seen as coping mechanisms. I don't think they're like inherently coping mechanisms, because I think people can drink and not necessarily use it as a coping mechanism. I think people can smoke weed and not necessarily use it as a coping mechanism. And people can, be sexual and not necessarily use it as a coping mechanism. But then you can use it as a coping mechanism. I think where these stories were written from, they were being used as coping mechanisms.
Right.
I don't think I was even conscious enough to know, though, that, I'm using this as a coping mechanism. That was never like, I was just using it because I thought it was how I,
function.
Coped, but there was no sort of conscious, like now if I used it, we'll see also, like, is like, when we say coping mechanism, that like immediately is bad, right? It's immediately kind of a negative thing, because we need to cope in a way. We need to use things to cope with life, right? Like we need to, if you exercise and it makes you feel good, that's kind of a coping mechanism, but it's sort of more positive, right?
I think there's a threshold when, between using those things, as you said, just for pure pleasure, and when it becomes addictive or harmful. And that's actually the definition of addiction. It's when compulsive, and I know you also mentioned OCD in this book. So when there is compulsion, impulsivity, but also not being able to stop it. And it comes and gets to a point where it is harmful. Now, that is coping. And what is the emotion underneath it?
Right.
It is very scary when it comes to a man, let alone a white man, I think.
What do you mean?
I mean, because where I come from, I'm North African, and the way I perceived white men is fascinating, because I'm like, are these people really genetically as cold as they are? Because they look like they have it all figured out. They look like they are emotionally so regulated that you're like, does this person even get angry?
Similar to what I say in the introduction, though, even though this is called How to Kill a White Man, this is not unique to the white man.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you want to talk about, I think it's unique to men in general. I also think it's relatable to women. I mean, I have more women read this book than men. I have way more, I would think, like, off the top of my head, I think I have more women reach out to me. Maybe not so much relating, but actually happy that I gave them a glimpse of what the male mind might be going through. But yeah, I don't know if that coldness is like unique, but that's also your experience.
That is something that you get to cognitively, I cognitively experience that with white people. To me, the way I've seen white people, they always seem to me, even though it's not true, but they always seem, whether it's a white woman or a white, they always seem to have their emotions so regulated. Like they'll be going through so much and they'll be like, yeah. And the way they talk about it, and I feel that is a big part of description in this book to show that actually we all go through the same thing. But how the person decides to display that emotion is what brings us to coping. Some people might just keep using comedy. You know, comedy could be a coping mechanism because now you're making jokes about every single situation.
Right.
And I feel that the connection and the understanding of these two components is extremely important, especially at the age we're at. I don't think I've had anybody explain to me how to regulate my emotions.
Right.
I've always had to take some time by myself and not wanting to connect with anybody or anything. And that's how I started processing and basically doing what we call it cognitive behavioral challenging, like questioning my thoughts. Because every single thought will generate a feeling. But now, is that thought really true for it to generate, let's say, humiliation or shame or sadness? Did I put a certain belief system that is harming me? And so I felt that I've always had to regulate my emotions that way, just because I've decided to be sober, and I feel that my addiction was kind of working out. I got to a point where I would work out 2-3 times a day until I got injured. And that's when I started thinking. To me, it was also sugar. I used to binge on sugar. Every single day. I would go through a hard, tough day. It was so normal to me to eat a bar of chocolate before going to sleep. I never thought that was wrong. I thought that was cute, actually. And it's until you decide to really take your life seriously and your health seriously that you get to see what is related to the behavior. Because this machine that we have will keep generating thoughts. And now if you don't have enough groundness, can we say groundness?
Sure.
Being grounded and mindfulness, I feel that you'll just keep reacting to life. Oh, I felt sad. I should just go out and start drinking. And it is actually all related to our conditioning. What our parents did to actually help us cope. Did they allow us to feel? And the reason why I said it is even worse for men is because technically men, the concept of being a man is, oh, you're not supposed to display certain emotions. Whether it's crying or it's anger. And I feel that this puts men in such a stuck position in between, where you're like, if you're angry and you're displaying anger, well, you're crazy and you're dangerous. But if you cry and try to like release certain things by crying, well, now you're soft and you're not being man enough. And I feel that is pretty interesting because, as I said, for a white man, which you mentioned is being the ship of the capitalist, and now you described in the beginning in the intro as the villain. You know, it's like, how can you connect all these facts, but also the conditioning that I just described, to now becoming the villain? Because white men, technically, they're not displaying in their behavior anything but emotional regulation from my perspective, again. But at the same time, there is that middle. We're like stuck in the middle between these emotions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say maybe you haven't met every white man on earth. You know what I mean? Because there are white men that are capable and willing to display their emotions.
Absolutely.
Hyperbole.
That's why I said it's from my perspective.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think particularly in today's world, we need to be, that's why I'm like really like aware, kind of hyper aware of that. Like, I'm not saying, I just think it's a thing that's rampant, generalizing these sort of tropes about what a culture or what a person of that skin color or that sexuality represents, because, you know, I just think we're doing these days, there's not I think it's getting so much better. I think we're in a total revolution of like belief, and I think it's one of the virtues of social media. It's where so much information is available now on being a better person in a way. But I just think that, there's a lot of like sort of blanket labels of, okay, you're this, so that, or the popular culture says you're white and male, or you're black and male, or you're white and female, whatever, you must represent this, and unless you really get to know the person, we don't know that, of course. And then I think what's interesting that I found is like the more conversations I have with people, like people are like way more open and receptive and available and positive than popular culture / popular news media makes us out to be,
Absolutely true.
Of course there's the bad apple, whatever, Of course there's the person who represents the negative idea. There's every type of person you could think of exists. But I think actually in general, if there is a generality to speak of, I think actually we are good and available and accepting. I think another about the context of the book too is that this was collected, and I published it like at the height of like George Floyd. So there was an element totally in the air of what does the white man represent? And it was kind of, and the political system here was changing, and just there were all these massive mirrors up for everybody on race, and particularly for me being a white heterosexual male, which is, as far as I could tell at that point in time, was kind of public enemy number one. White, heterosexual, and male. Could it get any worse? So this was kind of my contribution to saying, hey, I am taking a look at myself, I am looking at these things that, are kind of acculturations, of being white, heterosexual, and male.
Yeah.
And how can I be a better person? I mean, oddly, the thing is, though, the book's not even really that much about race. It's kind of misleading. Maybe like the umbrella, though, is, but it's funny because I've had people read it and they go, oh, I thought it was going to be like way more about like race in a way, which it's not a lot. Too.
Okay, so if I would connect a few dots, I mean, you said so many interesting things. Before I connect the dots, I want to first ask you, because you mentioned you wrote the book where there was more awareness happening towards the white male heterosexual,
yeah.
But at the same time, this seemed like a self-reflection, but I wanted to show that, yeah, we are conscious, there is that awareness, but I wanted to know about the safety. Like, how did you emotionally safe? How emotionally safe were you feeling at that time? Or how would you say that impacted your emotional safety?
What do you mean by that? What does that mean? I'm trying to figure out what you mean.
So we talked about the book being, so you said that the title is How to Kill a White Man.
Yeah.
But the content of it, you said that it was a little bit, some people gave their feedback that they thought there was going to be more about a white man.
Yeah.
But I feel that because of the misconceptions and prejudice that we just brought up, it felt like an emotional revelation of, hey, I know what's going on. I'm also here. I'm also listening. And we did follow up with being stuck in the middle. That was my previous question. And so if I would ask you this question again, being white, heterosexual, and a male, how your emotional safety was affected?
By putting this out?
By putting this out and going through the events about the race and the awareness, as you mentioned, on social media and everything else. And you said that you contributed to putting it out there.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I just think that I'm trying to sort of parse.
Is this too deep?
No, not at all. God, are you kidding? I'm just trying to connect what exactly you're trying to.
So
my emotional safety.
Yeah, because taking the responsibility of seeing that there are misconceptions.
That's the responsibility of the artist. The responsibility of any artist worth any of their salt that ever wants to matter is taking to me, this is my opinion, taking responsibility for something, telling your personal story. That's your responsibility to me, in my belief. What a real artist represents. Sure, Andy Warhol is fine, pop music is fine, that's all good. Those are all reasonable contributions, but the type of artist that I want to be, and I'm a journalist too, so I interview a lot of people, and I was interviewing a lot of pop artists, people that were famous just for being famous. And through that process, interviewing dozens and dozens of those people, I had to start going, what am I writing about this for? What are you contributing other than showing me that you have money and material wealth, etc.? And then you look at the art they're providing, and the art doesn't even say anything. It's just kind of flat. I mean,
it does tell you a bit about the person, what they're going through.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really being specific about what artists I'm referring to, but for me, putting my emotional safety on the line, if you will, is part of the job. I mean, that's part of the job as an artist, I come from like a long line of kind of particularly with my grandmother, who's won an Academy Award for Bonnie and Clyde. She won Best Supporting Actress. She's been nominated for 5 Tony Awards. She does Broadway. She's a director, actor. From her on down, she was very iconoclastic in challenging the system and, working on projects that were making people feel things. And, she started the Multicultural Shakespeare Theater Group in New York City, which was kind of unheard of at the time. This is a white woman starting the Multicultural Shakespeare Group in New York. So that's kind of like, my art is not necessarily fluff, which is, you can make fluff, make pop music, make pop art. That's totally cool. And a lot of those things, there are messages in those things, and maybe those artists will get around to a deeper message at some point. And I'm not even denigrating that. That's all good. But, for me, I kind of really want to say things. I really want to challenge the whole zeitgeist a little bit, So when I pick something to work on, and back to being more conscious and focused about what the subject matter is, I'm really aware of okay, is this gonna, could potentially affect something? Whether it's successful or not is none of my business, in affecting the world around me. But I want to affect things positively. I want to make stuff that makes people think. I mean, there's kind of a fine line there, though, because I also I want to have fun too with my creations. So I think that's super long-winded in saying that my emotional safety, that's just part of the deal. I think when you're, particularly as a writer, though, I think as a writer, as opposed to an actor or a painter or a musicians a little bit, because there's words, but there's not as many words. Writers, you are really showing yourself in a kind of different way than I think the other art forms don't do, just because of the medium they're working in,
Yeah, so you're basically saying that your job is to give the story the way it is because it's your personal story. And you're basically saying that is enough. You're not thinking about others' reactions. You're not thinking about any other basically consequence, because that is your personal story and you should be free to tell it based on the message you want to send. I want to know, when you write, do you have a specific audience that you think or you would want to send those messages to, whether it's about this book or about right now?
I mean, for me, I think it's, this is hard to come around to, I think, as an artist. And it's been said 1,000 times before. I think you have to make just what you want and what's personal to you. The paradox, I think, is that, so you create something that's personal to you, and say you're a plumber. For some reason, I'm always using the plumber as an analogy. I must have been a plumber in a past life. I don't know why, or I need to start a plumbing business at some point. But say you write a story about a plumber because you're a plumber. You're going to write that and go, nobody's going to relate to this. This is about a plumber. What's the percentage of people in this city that are plumbers? 1.5% of the city. However, if you create it in a personal way, everybody can relate. There's something really fascinating about that to me. There's relatable things across gender, across culture. It doesn't matter. So it's just about, is this personal? But then also, it's going to reach who it's supposed to reach. You know, it's the people that are supposed to get it are going to get it, and the ones that think it's terrible, they're going to think it's terrible, and then whatever.
Yeah,
you know?
I see what you mean, but you know, like when you mentioned other people or other pop music not being enough of a sustainable, let's say, message, or because of the writing style, or because it's not as impactful as it could be, don't you think that picking the audience would be important, and to write it in a style, or whether it's singing, or you mentioned earlier, maybe sometimes artists find other ways? Because I do believe, just like you wrote this book when you were in your 20s, which is pretty impressive and inspiring, because I feel like in our generations we're not reading enough. And at the same time, there are artists that are probably singing about subjects that feel absolutely stupid. But then at the same time, that is the part where that person is, to me, from my personal perspective, is stuck. And that's what I meant by being stuck emotionally, because you're not emotionally safe enough to feel like you could talk about your down moments, or on the other hand, of how angry you are at what's happening. And I feel that is also, could be, not that it is considered a coping mechanism, but to me it kind of is, because I feel that this person that's deciding to actively be an artist is not using the art, which could be and reach so many people and help elevate this planet, which is like the whole purpose of living, is evolution.
Right.
And I feel that is the part I talked about emotional safety. Like, how safe emotionally do you feel to be able to be vulnerable? And that is something that I referred to earlier, but I'm glad we got to it right now. The other thing that is absolutely important, and again, I'm going to say this is from my perspective, I feel that white people or white men, they think, or let's say overthink too much. And you know why I think that is? Because sometimes the work we do, especially if it's art, like writing, painting, you don't know why you're doing that specific art.
Right.
But then at the same time, you're doing it and you have an urge and you feel a need to do it. And then you're like, is this related? I'm going to put these stories together, and this is going to be How to Kill a White Man. And maybe it doesn't make sense. But this, to me, as a reader, as I read this, it spoke about the whole emotional safety, like not feeling safe, that you could literally feel dead inside. You can't do this, you can't do that. There's like oppression. And I look a lot at the emotional component, because I feel that as a species, we are physically kind of evolved. We know enough about our physical bodies.
Right.
Spiritually, it's kind of there. If you look for it, you'll find the spiritual part. But emotionally, I don't think we have any idea what's going on, or how our emotions have a whole and absolutely amazing language that speaks both through the physical and the spiritual.
Well, I would say that, first of all, back to the one thing about the creating thing, I think as soon as you start trying to create something for other people, you're done. It's not going to work.
I agree.
It doesn't work. I mean, the amount of times I've sat down and thought, okay, what do they want to hear? I can't.
I know what you mean.
Yeah, it doesn't work. So you have to say what you want to say.
Yeah.
And then, interestingly enough, people will relate to it.
Yeah.
Because as complex as humans may be, I don't know if we're that complex at our core. We're all kind of
the same.
Yeah, we all kind of want the same things and have the same, responses, like at the core. And then trauma, I believe in my experience, kind of dictates how you respond to all those things. That's kind of a whole other conversation. But I don't think I don't think that the emotional safety or concern, I could be totally wrong. I don't know where we would find those statistics, but I don't think anybody has a monopoly on lack of emotional availability or, you know, I've had Black men that have read this and said, oh my God, this was so great. I related, etc. You know, women, like I said, women read it and say, oh, this is like people that are complete opposite to what I am, you know? So, I mean, it's interesting to me that your perspective has picked up on something that white people or white men in particular are, you know, you seem to say like, you know, incapable of something or lacking, you know,
I never said those
safety
words.
or
I never said
I'm
that.
paraphrasing.
It got, yeah, no,
I'm
the paraphrasing is poorly done.
Oh, okay. Well, but you did say something about white men not, you know.
I think you heard it that way. Well, that comes from your belief system.
You just said.
No, I never said that.
White men don't have our.
I said what you think about feeling, and that came based on like we literally built blocks to get to the point where emotionally there's like this far end and this far end and a man is in between because he's not allowed to cry, and then if he's displaying some type of anger or angry emotions, it's going to be seen as crazy.
Right.
And that got me to the point about how do you emotionally feel safe for a person to either express themselves or basically be authentic enough to have that kind of freedom. I never said that they're incapable. Ever have I said that? I'll be a terrible therapist.
No. So, but you did say white men had a particular.
You don't even have the point. Just drop it.
What are you talking about?
What did I? You don't even remember what I said, and you're literally.
I'm piecing it. It's complicated. This is complicated language, so I'm piecing it together. You know,
but you don't even remember what I said. So
I'm remembering what you said. Oh, God.
So it feels like you felt like I attacked your race, and you're like coming at me.
Not at all. Not at all. I don't feel it. I don't feel my race is attacked at all. I don't. That's so not. No. What I'm saying is that like, I think everybody has things to work on with emotional safety and vulnerability and the things that you're talking about.
So we talked about a little bit of spirituality, a little bit of emotional safety, a little bit of what men go through, a little bit of your personal journey, which thank you for sharing, the next projects. I wanted to thank you for coming to my space and sharing everything you shared today.
Of course.
Amazing.
Thank you. And thank everybody out there. I appreciate you.
Yeah, it's really inspiring to see young people that are doing the work that you're actually doing.
Right. Thank you.
All right.